Welcome to Evolutionary.org Hardcore 2.0. Coming your way, episode 79. Today we're talking about Primobolan Quality and Fakes, complements of Para Pharma. And look, in this episode, we're going to go over Primobolan history and facts. This is a steroid that's kind of made a little, it's kind of come back, I would say, the last few years. A lot of guys are using it. We're seeing people logging with Primobolan more than in the years past, and people getting really, really good results. We had one of the guys we came on, Noah, we did an interview with him. He had used Primo and he had tremendous results. I mean, he went from looking just like an average Joe to looking like, dude, you need to go compete. You're like 6 months or a year away from going on stage in a regional competition and doing well. So Primobolan's really made a resurgence, and a lot of people are using it. So we're going to get over the facts. Mobster's going to talk about the history because Mobster is our history expert, and we're going to have a lot of fun with that. We're going to talk about the Arnold and golden era and all that stuff. We're going to talk about Primo faking and quality problems that we've experienced over the years. I've been a victim of it. I think Mobster's been a victim of it. Using fake Primo, using underdose Primo. It's a problem. It's been a problem.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Para Pharma Primo options. They have a couple different Primo options. Their Primo is legit. It's some good shit. We're going to talk about what they have to offer. And of course, we're also going to talk about how to dose and stack it. And this is going to be a really good one because we're going to give you some ideas that you may have never heard about. And this is going to allow you to kind of piggyback off our blueprints so that you can run your own Primo cycle and get really, really good results. So let me get a little background on the Primobolan history a little bit, and I'll bring in Mobster pretty early because Mobster can go over to the golden era. So Primobolan, chemical name is methanolone, and it has been one of the most popular injectable cutting steroids of all time, and especially was popular throughout the golden era of bodybuilding. And
yes,
look, at the end of the day, Arnold Schwarzenegger, everyone loves him. He's like The Rock. Everybody loves him. And, and one of the things, very likable people, and that's part of life. Mobster and I were talking about the pre-show about being likable on the forums. People like you on the forums, they're going to want to come. If the moderator on the forum, I went to a fishing forum years ago and I started posting, and the moderator was like an asshole. And I think he banned me or deleted a post or something. I'm like, what the fuck's this guy doing? This guy's an asshole. I can't fucking have my own opinion about fishing. The same thing on our forums. You have to be likable. And that's one of the things people like about Arnold, and people want to emulate Arnold because he's such a likable guy. So that's one of the reasons back in the day Arnold was able to get likable in the first place was thanks to Primo. It was his favorite anabolic steroid, and they loved using Primo in those days, Mobster. It's the old school golden era steroid. So why don't you touch on the more history on Primo in the golden era of Primo in the 70s, because you lived that era, buddy. You were there in that era.
As a child, I was certainly a fan of that era, and I came in just after when Arnold was absolutely kicking ass. My interest started in 1980, and I think Arnold peaks in 75. But I was aware of what was going on and whatever. And when I started lifting, I started collecting the magazines, and I got shit that's from the 1900s last in my collection. And people that talk about the history of the golden era and the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything else. I'm aware, for example, Steve Pump and I, and the outtakes. I've seen some of the outtakes that Golden Era bookworms shared, the stuff that didn't make the documentary, and so on and so forth. And even the sort of psychological makeup of Arnold. But let me expand on Primo itself specifically. So I've said in other shows when we've discussed it, it touched upon the product, touched upon Primo. There's a couple of reasons why it was super popular. And I think Steve said something to this effect as well. Number one is, and I've said this recently, they did not have access to the range of steroids that we have access to. That's just a fact. The history of steroids, which Steve and I have covered on, the number of steroids that have existed, the number of ones that never come made to market. Steve and I just recorded another show and discussed in a pre-show with him. There are names of steroids, and I literally looked. I've still got it as an open tab on my computer right now, Steve, of steroid esters I've never heard of in my fucking life. I've said in previous shows there's 100-ish, might be 120 actual anabolic steroids that have existed, whether it was in the lab or available or given out and then fell out of favor and whatever else. You go back to Arnold's time, and even if you had a good doctor, and Arnold and a few of the others were reputed to have a great doctor just up the road from Gold's, or certainly in that neck of the woods where you could go, get the doctor, do your bloods, and perhaps not even the kind of test that we have now, and give you a prescription, so actual prescribed pharmaceutical grade steroids, what people sort of seem to love, especially then. But it didn't have anything like the range that Para Pharma has right now. Never mind, and no lab did, no supplier did, not even getting it prescribed by the doctor did. So that was number one. I mean, Steve's talked about it, but didn't even have AIs, like the kind of AIs that we talked about. Testosterone wasn't that popular, and so on. All right. So, there was always stories about what was available in Russia, and have one person to get hold of this. I've heard story. I think Pete Raminsky's done an interview, which is in one of the historical books. His uncle worked for a lab that created steroids, pharmaceutical grade, and got a suitcase of steroids sent to him by his uncle. Very nice uncle, it has to be said. And at one point was on 10,000 milligrams a week. Just the crazy, fucked up shit. Why did people like Arnold and others, and I have literally sat down and spoke to people in person, Steve, over dinner at an award show, a bodybuilding award show, with a fellow called Dr. Leo Rosa. I think he might still be alive, I'm not sure. He was one of the guys that would hang out with Arnold in Venice Beach and drive around in the back of the car. They had a convertible, him and the guys cruising around and chatting to the girls, etc. So this is literally from the horse's mouth. So in the case of Primobolan, why Primobolan? So again, not many options, but you bulked up, and they really did bulk up in those days, Steve. I mean, fat motherfuckers. Certainly putting on 30 or 40 pounds, only of which 10 to 20 pounds, if they were lucky, was muscle. And assuming you were a big motherfucker like Arnold, and then having to drop 15, 20 pounds, maybe more, water and fat in order to get into shape. So why was Primo super, super popular then? With the limited options that were available. Quite simply, it was really good at retaining as much of that muscle that you gained in your season as possible while you were getting into shape, while you were looking to get cut. So you're looking to lose all that water, all the fat, all the stuff that jiggles, as Arnold would say in one of his things, if it jiggles, it's fat. Jump up and down, everything jiggling, fat. Keep the fat going, run up and down the beach, ride the bike, do the stairs at Venice Beach, 120 steps, whatever the fuck it is, get shape, get lean, take it up a notch, count down to the Olympia, etc., 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 but maintain or retain, more specifically, Steve, retain as much muscle as possible. So even now, and this is probably why it's become popular now, there's almost an argument, and because I'm an old motherfucker, I say these kind of things. Some people don't train as hard as they should. So the idea is that if you've done some kind of training and you built a decent amount of muscle, the idea, not easy, because it's never easy. The idea relative to everything else, not that a hardcore, heavy duty, insane, get out there and grind every fucking day kind of mentality, but perhaps a little bit less intense, is that you are retaining that muscle. You might have only put on 5 pounds last year. Well, let's keep those 5 pounds while you get into shape. Let's keep those 5 pounds while you're looking to get ripped for the beach. Let's keep those 5 pounds so your abs are popping and your chest popping when you do a modeling gig. Maybe even if you're a sort of competing bodybuilder, it's more like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pounds. Let's keep as much of that muscle as possible. And Primo for that is fantastic. I'd also argue, Steve, and me and you talked about this when we've talked about other steroids as well. If testosterone is a mass builder, if DECA and Sustanon are mass builders, Primo for me is one of those ones, and again, more average Joe-ish now, certainly more broader appeal now versus competing bodybuilders in the past. It's one of those steroids that helps you shine. It's one of those ones that's going to give you kind of a bodybuilding-esque look to even an average physique, all things considered. Now, if you are serious, if you are hardcore, if you're out there kicking ass, and you still use Primo, then again, it's going to be one of those ones that's going to give you a certain level of polish in that particular way. The only arguments in terms of historical accuracy, Steve, and again, this is where these stories can get a little tiny bit confused when it comes to history, is the amounts. Honestly, and the problem with that is no motherfucker was writing it down. We certainly didn't have YouTube. We didn't have people out there sort of finding out when someone had fucked up or someone had died, someone had OD, someone had done crazy shit, and posting about it like with that same fucking day, never mind the next day. Can you imagine? And so lots of the conversations then were guys having scrambled eggs after a workout, rumors where someone had visited California and then gone back to New York, and those kind of conversations. And of course, the other element that came about at that time, and to a lesser degree this time when it comes to history, is the idea that somebody else is doing something more crazy, more fucked up than you are, or less crazy or less fucked up than you are. And those kind of backwards and forwards rumors used to happen. I've got magazines from all over the world, French stuff. I think I'm looking at buying maybe this week another 1930s French bodybuilder magazine, Steve. And I think the earliest bodybuilder magazine, German, right? 1896. I'd love to get a copy of that, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, and even then, the idea that the other guy was doing something different or something that come out that you hadn't got hold of, all of that kind of stuff. So when we look back at history, when we look back at the golden age, you go, what was available to them? What physiques did they have? What were they able to achieve? Was Arnold, and this is another rumor that I'll add, and again, it's just a rumor. The idea was when it came to Debo, when it came to products like Primo, etc., the Arnold, I think some of Arnold's competition was of the opinion that Arnold was doing twice as much as they was, that he was grabbing a handful of Debo and so on and so forth. There might be a grain of truth to that. I suspect it was just people trying to figure out why he was kicking their ass and they couldn't get their head around the fact that he was kicking their ass. But yeah, Primo, for sure, retaining that muscle when you got cut. You increase your calorific, you're decreasing your calorific intake, you're increasing the amount of output in terms of cardio. Arnold running up and down the beach, the Venice steps, riding the bike, etc., like I've touched upon. And that kind of stuff, as we know, cardio can sometimes take away your hard-earned muscles. You want to hang on to it as you get into shape. And that was the reason why, with the limited availability, Primo was out there, el numero uno, certainly in terms of the Arnold, what did he do back in the day conversations. What do you think on that, Steve, before we move on?
Yeah, and let's explain a little bit more about how the what Primobolan is out about. So you got to remember, Primo is a DHT derivative, and that means it cannot aromatize into estrogen. So when you stack it with something that does aromatize into estrogen, like a lot of testosterone, then you could start getting the estrogenic issues, the bloating, the water retention. But as long as you're stacking it correctly, which we're going to get into later in the show, you won't experience any estrogen issues. And it's also going to have low androgenic issues. So the androgenic side effects, the aggression, the libido enhancement, the effects on anger and mood changes and appetite and all this other stuff, it just doesn't come with. So when I run Primo, it's like I'm not even on anything. So it's really just a slow quality builder. And at the end of the day, it's not for everybody. If you're not going to be content with gaining a few pounds of high quality muscle and you'd rather gain 10 or 15 pounds of sloppy, fluffy water and fat and sloppy gains that aren't keepable, as Mobster said, then Primobolan isn't for you. So Primobolan is for those of you who want to gain good quality muscle. You can go on the forum and check out some of the logs of guys who have run Primo. They didn't blow up 10, 15 pounds. They just gained good quality mass. But what's interesting when it comes to quality muscle mass, you can gain like 3 pounds or 4 pounds on a cycle and look way more muscular because you cut fat, you get more cuts, and the muscles look much more quality. So you'll actually look like you gain a ton of muscle when you really didn't gain that much weight. But you got to remember, 1 pound of muscle is a lot. You go to the grocery store and look at a steak, 1 pound of steak is a lot. 2 pound, 3 pound, 4 pound. That's a lot, man. Think about a pound of steak is 16 ounces. When you go to a restaurant, you order a steak, 16 ounces is like top of the menu. Usually restaurants, they serve 8 ounces, 10 ounces, maybe 12 ounces. 60 ounces is a lot. That's a lot of steak to eat. So a pound is a lot. I think a lot of people underrate it. So you got to get away from, oh my God, I want to gain 10, 15 pounds when you're using Primo. Because if you get in that mindset of, I'm looking to run this 12 weeks of Primo and I'm looking to put on 10, 15 pounds, then you're just going to be disappointed with Primo. And we've seen that over the years with guys who have run Primo. A lot of guys at the end of Primo, they say, you know what, it's a waste. I'm just going to go run Tren. I'm just going to go run Deca. I'm going to go run testosterone. I'm going to run equipoise. I'm going to run something else. It's just a waste to me. And that's their perspective because they went into the Primo not understanding how it works. So it's very important to understand how Primo works specifically. Mobster?
Yeah, just a quick thought, Stephen. I actually wrote something for myself the other day in this regards. Something I said in terms of gains. Now, I've touched upon cycles I've done where I've gained £20 on cycle, not wanting to keep £20 after the cycle because it was useful for me to be £20 bigger, how strong I was, etc., etc. The reality, and the only reason I'm well over 300 fucking pounds, I've done the math, Steve. My gains have been £4 to £6 per year, just for 45 fucking years. 45 lots of four, 45 lots of six is a huge amount of body weight. So my gains have actually been perfectly reasonable, in spite of the fact that I'm a big ass motherfucker, etc., etc. And I don't mind being a big ass motherfucker, versus the idea of blowing up £20, lose £10, blowing up £20, lose £10, repeat, repeat, repeat. I can definitely see now, and again, looking back over the history of my own personal use and what I wanted and desired at different points in my training. If I look back now, and especially if I'm looking to enhance my physique, not necessarily my strength, which is my focus, the idea of 4, 5 quality pounds of muscle tissue, as Steve said, that transformation, that's incredibly sexy. If it was on the front of Men's Fitness, Steve, and I said every time you do a cycle, you're going to gain £3, £4. There's a lot of younger guys going, that's fucking shit, Steve. I want to be bigger than that. I want to be quick. I want to be massive now. But when we show them someone like Noah, and we say, look, that's £4, £5, £6 of muscle tissue, he looks fucking way different. Yes, mum. That's exactly what happens. Now imagine if he does that again next year and the next year and the next year. 4 years' time, that's £24 of muscle tissue. He will look he will look like a different man. He'll look like something different completely. And again, go back to the Arnold thing that I talked about at the beginning. A quarter of an inch here, a half inch there, bring down the waist, pop out the shoulders, quality keepable muscle. Hey, hang on. And how did he do that? He did it with Primo. Okay. I can see why Primo's become more popular. Again, especially if you don't want to be a fucking giant. Trust me, I've been 336 pounds. When I went from 280 to 300, Steve, that was uncomfortable. It's great in the gym. It's great standing there. It's great moving shit around. But if I have to go out and do 15,000 steps or even 10,000 steps, it's no. If I have to walk up and down, fuck, I left something on the top floor. I need to go back, go drag yourself up by the fucking handrail because you put on 10, 15, 20 pounds. £5 when a normal person can stand in front of the mirror and go, just look, whoa, look at my fucking chest, look at my arms, my sleeves are tighter. And not every fucker wants to be 250, 270, 300, 336 pounds. Few people do. Sometimes you like to think you do, but once you start training, you get into what you really want, find out where you want to be. My niche has always been strength, probably for the last 20 something years. 25 years is strength. Prior to that was muscle, and I got to a decent size. But after that, strength to where I am today. But not everybody's out there doing what I'm doing. So for those of you that want quality muscle, don't want to weigh 250, 300 pounds, Primo should definitely be something you need to think about because of the quality gains. And again, we've just using Noah as an example, transformation of his physique. The guy trains at Planet Fitness. I yanked his chain on that. He's getting some great workouts here. And you can see literally 2, 3 photographs, you can see the difference in his physique. Just to use him as an example. Other people have done the same thing. And again, let's let him go and get in shape. He's built some muscle, wants to cut down, wants to look good, and hold on to that hardened muscle tissue. It absolutely makes sense to use a product like Para Pharma's Primo to do that, Steve. Back to you.
Let's get into the next topic. It's very, very important one. Primo faking and quality problems. So listen, I did some research before this episode and I wanted to see what was out there when I would kind of Google why is Primo faked? Why does Primo have quality problems? And I got a lot of different results. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're legit. But look, at the end of the day, Primobolan is a more expensive steroid, and Primobolan is, it's harder to make, it's harder to source, it's harder to get raws. That much we can agree compared to, say, testosterone. Testosterone is really, really cheap to source. It's really cheap to get the raws. It's really cheap to make. So they're able to make a lot of money off of testosterone sources and brands. But Primobolan, it's much more expensive to source. So they're making a smaller margin. So they're going to cut corners. And when you're dealing with, when you're dealing with people, people are incompetent. Some people, I think maybe 10% of the population, maybe 5%, are not good people.
Mm.
And maybe that number is higher in the fitness industry. I don't know. We can debate that another day because, I can pick any industry and tell you, medical industry, finance industry, any industry,
Yeah, yeah,
aerospace industry, you could have 5% of people being bad people too. But here's the thing, like, are they putting out fake Primo on purpose? Maybe not necessarily, but maybe it's incompetence. Maybe they're using bad raws, et cetera, et cetera. It could be a lot of different reasons. But my experience over the years with Primo is I've used a lot of fake Primo, and it sucks because you spend a lot of money on Primo and it's faked. So what they'll do is they'll fake Primo with Deca. I've heard that they fake Primo with testosterone propionate. I've heard that they fake Primo with a lot of different things. And
mm.
it's one of those things where you have to trust the brand that you're getting it from. So Para
Yes,
Pharma, their Primo, we know it's legit. We've had people log their Primo. We've had people test their Primo. And
yeah,
we're gonna get into that later in the show. But you can trust Para Pharma. But there is a major problem with Primobolan being faked over the years, and I think a big part of that is the economics of the source. They don't want to, the brand, they don't want to go the extra measure to have their stuff legitimately tested, sent off to be tested. That costs money. They don't want to go through the extra expense of sourcing the raws from a better dealer that's more expensive, maybe 3 times or 4 times more expensive. They rather go with a cheaper dealer to save money. And that's what happens. And over time, what ends up happening is people get used to Primo being fake so much that they just stop using it. And I think that was a big reason why Primo kind of fell off a lot,
yeah,
Mobster.
yeah,
Um,
definitely, man. In the
and
80s.
I lost confidence in Primo, and a lot of people did out there, and they stopped using it. But now, because of Para Pharma, we're able to start using it again. So, Mobster touched on the Primo faking quality problems.
Yeah, I mean, I also think in Steve, in terms of the men physique and men in the classic class versus the open class. So there's a shift in terms of the quality physiques and the way you want a physique to look. In terms of the faking side of things, 100% agree with everything that Steve said. In fact, I've seen this, and I've done some historical research via some of the older magazines. The last time we done some recordings a couple of weeks ago, we did a big batch of recordings. I was at that time plowing through some old muscle medias, and they were talking about the Mexican labs and stuff like that. So, for example, and then Bill Llewellyn's wrote on this in his Anabolics Encyclopedia and those books that he brought out. So, you had to be an expert on the way that the bottle was supposed to look. You had to be an expert on how the box was. Why were people producing fakes? Well, that's quite simple. There was a market for bodybuilders. People were paying more per milligram then relative to economics and whatever else you want to talk about per products. The numbers they were talking about in multimedia, Steve, for a stack. Literally, a bottle costs this, a bottle costs that. Costs less now. Costs less now because we got more people using steroids because there are more labs available. And we talk about this, and I'll expand on this at the end of the show. You don't get to stay in business if you produce crap. So Mexican labs were getting raided. If they would be involved in narcotics and steroids and so on. And when you have that kind of criminal mentality, if I'm going to say to you that I could sell a bottle of oil with nothing in it for $35, $40 now, never mind what they were paying $100 or the equivalent of $100 back in the day. Christ almighty, I'll do that tomorrow. It's the same reason why we see fake sports shoes from all the well-known brands, why we even see fake stuff that Steve touched upon in the aero industry, Steve. The certification and the proof of product for repairs and maintenance and upkeep of airplanes is super tight. That some years ago, you could buy fake spare parts for the airliner that you were going to go abroad on your holidays with. And of course, was that going to be as good as the legitimate product? Was it? Fuck. Planes falling out of the sky, things that shouldn't happen, engines that failed, etc. And again, the same applies to us with bodybuilding. What the fuck was we putting into our bodies? So pure greed, number one, pure laziness, the simple fact that Primo, for quite a while, even now it's relatively more expensive, not hugely so, but a little bit more expensive than say most forms of testosterone. But back in the day, relative to everything else that was being paid for, it was a lot more expensive. So it was way more likely that it's going to be fakes. People, it was one of those sort of golden egg sort of situations, goose on the golden egg. You start off with this great situation. I got legit Primo. The guy, it's fantastic. I'm getting great results. I'm holding on to my muscle tissue, but it's 60 or 70, equivalent of $60 or $70 a vial versus say $35 a vial, $50 a vial of other products. Ooh, that's $20, motherfucker. That's nearly $30. So people get greedy or lazy, or lab gets raided, or they expand into something else and they take off their eye off the ball with the people that are working for them. Or we said about this before, Steve. Yeah, it's got a steroid in it. It's just not the fucking steroid that you brought, not the steroid you thought you brought. So that happened, and it happened a lot. The whole reputation. I don't think there's a single guru podcast, call it what you like, on the history of the sport that talks about PDs that would not agree that therefore it was for a long time, certainly probably 1980s to 2000s, a little bit after 2000s, where for you to be able to find legitimate Primo was fucking rare, properly dosed, useful, etc., etc. Like I said at the beginning of the show, Arnold and his buddies were, by reputation, reputedly able to go and see a doctor and have pharmaceutical grade, pharmaceutically produced steroids given to them on prescription, $100, boom, 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 job done, thank you very much, win the Mr. Olympia. For 20 years, that didn't happen. 2000, 1980, 2000, 2005, 2010, so maybe 30 years, up and down like a yo-yo. Other pro bodybuilders and Mr. Olympians have talked about this. Dorian's talked about, the forms of Trent Parabolin, fantastic stuff, blah, blah, blah. But could you get hold of it? Had to become from a doctor. You had literally to know someone who knew someone who could get it from this place, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, we've got companies like Para Pharma. So why do Para Pharma, companies like Para Pharma, because the cracking competition is massive, because the market's that much bigger, and so therefore, actually, for you to stay in business, and we're going to expand on this at the end of the show, for you to stay in business, you do not want to get caught selling fakes. You do not want to get caught selling underdosed product. If for that to happen, you lose business. Your reputation goes out the window. You're 10, 15, 20 years like Para Pharma in the business. You're not going to fuck that up. If it's an extra $5 or $10 a vial, fine, fuck it. And people out there, like we mentioned earlier on, one of the regular members of the forum, Noah, seeing great results. So that's the way that it's up. Now, I've used Para Pharma products. I haven't used Primo, but I have used Para Pharma products. And I know how I felt on them. I know the results I got for them. And that's the kind of reputation. When I'm on the forums, how did you get on Mobster? Fan-fucking-tastic. How did you feel using it? This is how I felt. What were the results? I can say that. It's in my log. And my reputation doing these shows, Steve's the same. Our reputation is the reason why we do these shows. Our reputation is the reason why we're able to give you the information that we give you. And we're learning all the time, both the history, how products are made, how the business works, everything, all the time, always expanding the information. So when it comes to Primobolan, we want to put out legitimate information on how it came to be, what was the history, the reason why there's a resurgence in the popularity, how to use it, etc., etc. It's important to us to be 100% straight on that stuff, because I want to be able to look back on a podcast like this one today, Steve, 5 or 10 years down the road, go, yep, did a great job, gave the listener exactly what they needed to know, purely and simply because I want to be able to do that. It's not a question of 5, 10 years, I'm going to give a fuck. I'm going to say, my reputation is going to follow me. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of listeners. Let's see what they think about what I said then. It should still apply then as it does now. And this is the reason why. So we look back through history, we see what's happened, we look where we are today, and we go, right, does Para Pharma produce a great Primo? Yes, they fucking do. And these are the reasons why. And this is important to Para Pharma. It's important to us when we do the shows, and hopefully important to you, the listener, to give you out this kind of information for you. Talk about Steve. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, let me just follow up with this. I think you brung it up, but I'm just going to follow up a little bit more. Is that today during the 90s and 2000s, it became really hard to get Primobolan because here's the problem: if someone sold you Primo, you would have to just trust their word that it was legit. There's no way to test it. Yeah. But now we have ways you can take a vial of gear and ship it off to a lab and have them
A
test
lot
it.
easier.
And they'll tell you exactly what's in it. They'll tell you exactly what's in it to a T. You didn't have that back then. So guys back then, they used Primo. They didn't like that they were using an underdose Primo. Maybe it was 50% Primo and 50% just oil, just regular oil that they were injecting. Or maybe it was Deca
Yeah.
they're injecting, or maybe it was testosterone or equipoise or anything. We don't know. Or it could be Winstrol. I mean, who knows? And what ends up happening is people lose trust in that steroid. But today we have a way to do it. You can send it off, and people have been doing it, as Mobster said. We're talking about it later in the podcast, but people have been sending the Para Pharma product Primo out,
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
like, "Look, this is legit." So we're very lucky today that we have access to that, and it's a good thing that these scumbags out there, scumbag brands and scumbag sources that are selling fake product, are getting called out, and they're getting
Yes.
shamed, and they should be. They should be ashamed of themselves because they too can send their own products out to be tested and see that it's fake before they sell it to the public. But they're either too cheap or they're too incompetent to do that. So it's good that we have brands like Para Pharma that actually take pride in selling good products, and that's the key to sales. If you ask any successful salesman who's self-made, not a trust fund buddy, a self-made successful salesman, they say product. The number one thing is product. If you don't have a good product to sell, you're not going to be able to
Yes.
sell. You're not going to be able to have people keep coming back to you. If you have a good product, not only will the same people come back to you, but they'll tell their friends and family to go to you. And then that's how you build your reputation, you build your business, as Mobster said. So Mobster,
Yeah. Let me just finish on that, Steve. Look, and this comes from the salesman analogy. Steve and I train. Steve and I want to look good. We want to be strong. We want to be muscular. We are exactly like our listeners in that regards. We try to be good with our diets. We try to be good with the recovery, with our rehab. We talk from experience of having done those things. And if you ask again, the best salesman in the universe, this say just sells fucking beds for a living, Steve. He needs to be able to have slept on that bed, tried that bed, talked to customers, got feedback, gone back to the company that makes the product that he's selling. Can we change this? Can we have that kind of stuff? And then for him to be able to sell that product, it's going to be an absolute piece of piss because he'll say, I've slept on it, I had a great night's sleep. They listen to feedback from me and the customers, they listen to what people want, they produce an absolutely great product, they never rest on their laurels. That's how that stuff gets done. The best salesman in the world is someone who's had great results. So this is the way that kind of stuff works when it comes to Primo. We have talked to people that are using Primo right now, and you can see photographs of the people that we're talking about by coming onto the forums and looking at their physiques for yourself. You can ask them, is that Para Pharma? How did you get on? How did you feel? Was there post-injection pain? How much was you using? What kind of cost was that? Whereabouts do you? Oh, okay, so you live there. That's not too bad. Shipping was great. So how quick was? That's exactly the kind of stuff you want. And like I said, there's this thing. Let me just touch on that reputation thing one more time. So, how important is it? And again, the salesman analogy applies here. I've had a company, doesn't exist anymore, local company. You've got a great reputation. You've been doing this stuff a long time. Can you try our product and let us know what you think? And if you think it's good, let other people know. So yeah, no problem at all. And I did that. Unfortunately, Steve, they lasted 9 or 10 months for two reasons. Way too much of an investment in growth hormone in their case, which they couldn't move because they hadn't created a market for it. It wasn't a big enough market locally for them to sell it. And the other one was quality product is hard work. And I think they kind of got lazy. And unfortunately, also one of the people, the person I spoke to involved, ended up ODing. But that's by the by. But that was more. It was more the fact that they just wasn't able to put the work in to stay with a quality product, and they lasted 9 months. You need to be properly motivated to run a proper business when you're doing this kind of thing. And again, end user, same thing. So people at these companies train, people at these companies work out, and for them, it's important to have this stuff, and it builds your reputation. It makes you a good guy, and it gets you the business. So that's the super important side of it. And I think, especially when we're talking about Primo, the idea that we'd have to have this conversation about testosterone or Dynamo was almost laughing. That because of the nature of the history of Primo, it's a little bit more work to build up your reputation because of how the people used to fake it, how the supply was hard to get hold of, how even the raws were difficult to produce versus now. And I'll use the phrase that I've used before we move on, Steve. When I say this, You guys have never had it so good when it comes to the history, accessibility, the price per milligram, etc., etc. This is right across the board, especially with companies like Para Pharma, compared to how difficult it was, how often it was fakes, how companies would fucking rise and fall too quickly, almost too quickly to keep up. That's why those encyclopedias don't exist anymore, Steve. It's just pointless. And in fact, I would actually say, arguably in that particular way, it's rare to see someone come in and kind of take over the market. You get to stay around by producing solid products, and you end up with a history all of your own and a reputation. Then, when it comes to selling, a lot easier because you've done the work, you keep the work, and you keep plugging away to make sure that both your in-house testing and out-house testing. As I've even expanded a little bit before on the whole, I mean, Primobolan is kind of a weak steroid. We touched upon this already. So the idea in terms of actual building muscle per se, I would have other choices. But like I said, in terms of retaining muscle, this is el numero uno, and especially when it comes to diet. What would you go as anything you want to add, Steve, before we move on to the next thing?
No, let's move on to Primo, Para Pharma Primo options.
Yeah,
And look, they have two options, pretty typical. I mean, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel here, but it is good
no,
that Para Pharma offers you two different options. They have 100 milligram a milliliter and they have a 200 milligram a milliliter. Now, if you're a historian, you want to really learn about this stuff. It's important to remember that back in the day, they only had access to 100 milligram a milliliter. So that's basically your base to work with. It's really cool that Para Pharma, though, came up with 200 milligram a milliliter. Because if you're like me, you hate injecting and you don't want to inject as much um, volume, that's good that you can go ahead and go with the 200 milligram milliliter. So if you wanted to run 400 milligrams a week, you could just do 2 cc's a week and you'd be good.
yeah,
But if you're a guy, you rather just do it, more often, and or you could just load up the syringe with 3 cc's and do 100 milligram milliliter, so 300 milligrams all at one time. And I've tried doing that before as well. It's just a lot of volume. So if you don't mind doing that, you can go that route as well. So, but the good thing about it is Parapharma has those two options, and these are good standard options that they have available. Now with Primobolan, it is an enanthate ester, so it's important to understand that what that means. And that means that the ester half life is going to be about 7 days, maybe 8 days, just depending on which data you're looking at. But really, you can get away with injecting it twice a week or 3 times a week. Now, back in the day in the 70s, what they would do is they would just do 100 milligrams a day, and they would just pin it every day, 100 milligrams a day. So it came out to about 700 milligrams a week. And or
yeah,
maybe they take Sunday off and they want it pin on Sunday, so it'd be 600 milligrams a week. So that's how they would do it back in the day, because again, it's just 100 milligram milliliter. So you can do it like that, it's fine, but it's just not necessary to inject it every single day. That's all. So really, with Primo, I've used it anywhere from 300 up to 600 milligrams a week. Um, and really, the key with Primo is your training and your nutrition, and really being able to, take advantage of the stuff that Primo does. Just like any other steroid, it's going to boost your protein synthesis. It's going to do a good job of binding the sex hormone binding globulin. It's going to tear down a lot of the 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 walls that prevent you from growing muscle, because your body has mechanisms in place to prevent you from gaining too much muscle in having too much muscle on your frame. And so Primo knocks them down, but it does it in a mild way where it's not giving you a tremendous amount of side effects. It's not giving you a tremendous amount of inflammation in the body. And there's some literature out there on Primo that it actually can help boost your immune system rather than suppress your immune system like other anabolic steroids will. So that's one of the other good things about Primobolan. So look, if you want to use it solo, 300 to 600 milligrams a week,
yeah,
12 weeks is fine. A lot of people over the years, they've said, oh my God, you got to run Primo 14 weeks, 16 weeks, 20 weeks. Otherwise, you're wasting your time with it. No, not necessarily, because it has an
yeah,
anti ester. It's going to peak in your system after about 40 days. So that's about a month and a half. So I don't see that's about 5, 6 weeks. So it's not necessary for you to go past 12 weeks necessarily. You got to remember too, with recovery, and Rome wasn't built in a day. So there's no need to think, oh my God, I'm going to get where I want to go in one cycle. That's just not how it works. So yeah,
Here's a thought, Steve, and I think this is where some of the stuff that Steve's discussing kind of occurs to me. And again, that muscle retention aspect is super important here. This is to me is a question of the end game. So what date do I need to be in shape by? And let's just use a competition analogy again. So in 3 months' time, 12, 14 weeks, I've got a competition. I'm going to be on stage and I'm going to use Primo because I know Primo works for me. How fucking out of shape are you? And how hard's the cardio that you're going to need to do between now and then? How hard you're going to diet? So if I've got time, 14 weeks is reasonable, then I shouldn't have to do anything crazy or fucked up or extreme, which might mean multiple steroids. It might mean fat burners. It might mean clean. It might mean this, that, and the other. Versus, I'm actually in kind of decent shape, and I've only got to knock off 10 or 15 pounds, which is like a pound a week. If it's 15 pounds, Steve, less. Half a pound if it's only 10 pounds of muscle. That three-quarters of a pound. That's great. That's kind of easy. And for me, then Primo would be fucking amazing, and I'd probably need to run next to nothing else with it in order to get in shape. But if I was massively out of shape, and for some reason contracting, maybe I'm contracted pro athlete. Oh, I've got to compete in this fucking competition. Let's take more drugs. Let's do more crazy fucked up shit. Primo's will almost be secondary in that example. So it's going to come down to the condition that you're in and the length of time you've got to get into shape. So here's how this stuff really works, Steve. The longer you have to get into shape, the less harsh, stupid, fucked up, crazy shit you need to do. So for me, there, Primo would be el numero uno choice for retaining muscle, where I moderately increase the amount of cardio that I do daily, where I moderately decrease my intake of calories, I clean up my diet, and I ease down. Then I've only really got to do crazy, fucked up shit, especially if I'm competing on stage in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks maximum. 2 weeks, 3 weeks. If you're out of shape more and that date is short, then I'm going to have to do harder stuff in between. This is sometimes why we see, and I'm just going to touch on that sort of side of the sport. I've seen this more with female athletes than with male athletes, where the extremes in a short period of time have mostly come down to the time scale and the fact that they were more out of shape than they thought they was, or they couldn't accept the fact that they was more out of shape. And so therefore the things that they've needed to do to get into shape have been more extreme. And Primo is not going to be el numero uno example. So this is one of those things, guys. Give yourself plenty of time to get into shape, and Primo is going to be absolutely fucking amazing for you. And like I said earlier on, in terms of just holding on to that muscle tissue, looking at the numbers, I'm going to have to say I agree with Steve. My preference would be for 2, 3 times a week in that particular. And again, I think, and we're going to touch on this briefly, what I would stack with it. I think I would probably keep it to around 600 milligrams and then stack something in with it. What do you think about what you would add to Primo if you was
yeah.
doing, like,
So
for example,
let's talk
yeah,
about dosing in a second. Let me just add this as well. Although I wouldn't run any cycle more than 12 weeks because I want you to recover. I also with Primo, I want to run it short. I wouldn't run it less than 10 weeks. You gotta remember it's a slow builder. It's gonna take 30 to 40 days to even reach peak in your body. So really the first month is just it building up in your body. You're not going to see magic start happening until that second month. So it's very important to run it at least 10 weeks. So 10 to 12 weeks would be ideal, with 12 weeks being the most
usually, yeah,
ideal.
yeah.
So I see some people recommending 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 4 weeks even. These people just don't understand how esters work. And you got to remember, this is an enanthate ester that's attached to the Primo. And I've seen other sources sell other Primo esters, but they're just not popular. But look, at the end of the day, enanthate ester is just like testosterone enanthate. You wouldn't run testosterone enanthate 4 weeks or 6 weeks. If you were going to do that, you'd run test probe. So you got to remember how esters work. And it's important to run Primo the correct way so you get the most out of it. Let's talk about dosing. And I've dosed Primo with a few different things. Now, here's the thing with Primo. When you run it by itself, it's because it is a DHT derivative, and DHTs bind to SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, more better than any other thing out there. Okay. It's really your advantage to stack Primo and not run it solo. You get the most out of Primo. Now, back in the day, the golden age, they would stack Primo with Debo. And the reason they would do it with Debo is because testosterone was too difficult to navigate. You didn't have much flexibility with using testosterone. People were worried about gynecomastia. They were worried about water retention. They didn't have access to anti-estrogens. So what Arnold would do, he would run the Primo like 600-700 milligrams a week and throw in like 20-30 milligrams or even 10 milligrams of Dianabol. Sometimes a little more here and there, and that gave the cycle a little kick. So you could do that. You can copy the golden age strategy, or you can just today throw in some testosterone. If you throw in like 150 milligrams of testosterone or less, you won't need an anti-estrogen. But if you start jacking up your testosterone dose, 300, 400, 500, then you're going to want to start looking at using the anti-estrogen. So Para Pharma has you covered. They have excellent Dianabol. They have Para Pharma Dianabol, different options.
Yeah.
They have many options on testosterones that you can use. If you look at Hardcore 2.0 episode 78, we actually get into different testosterone options from Para Pharma. And then you can also stack in some other things. I've stacked Trend with it, believe it or not. I've stacked Equipoise with it. So I've stacked different things. Some people for cutting, they'll stack Anavar with Primo. And the way you would do now, Anavar and Primo, they're both DHTs. So this is one of those cycles you would run just to polish. And it would, and in that situation, if you wanted to kind of like build lean muscle mass and recomp, I'd add in a little bit of a kick to it, a little bit of Debo or a little bit of testosterone just to give the cycle a little kick. So those are some of the dosing and stacking that I would do, Mobster, in there. And yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I like your Anavar one, Steve, and I'll tell you for why, right? And this is one of those things that happens for those of you that have never competed or got into crazy shape. So one of the issues was, and probably still is, that as you get closer and closer to competition, there's a certain weird, crazy, fucked up irony in that it comes that much harder to lift heavy weights, and those heavy weights are the ones and the sets and the reps and the volume, whatever it was that you did, was what got you into shape, is what made you look like a bodybuilder. And the problem sometimes with the diet and cardio is it makes you weak. It makes you not weak, but weak relative to where the fuck you was when you were strong like a bull. And so the problem there is, how can I maintain as much of this muscle tissue as possible, which is great what Primo does, but the Anavar too, Steve, and you said, I've said somewhere between 30 to 50 milligrams a day to maintain your strength. And in maintaining your strength and retaining onto that muscle tissue, you probably have, in my mind, from what you've said as well, the ideal situation of enabling you to keep all that goddamn hard-earned muscle that you spent the last 2, 3, 4 years, and certainly prior to this cycle, ready for this competition, holding on to that muscle tissue so that you don't look like, and this cut sometimes happens, skinny fat or kind of stringy looking, and then fill out like a motherfucker post competition, go back to looking like a bodybuilder. No, we want you to look like a bodybuilder. We would look like someone who's lost the fat and have everything on stage looking absolutely amazing. All those benches and squats and deadlifts and everything else that you've done to get the big and strong muscular motherfucker that you was, boom, that's still there. All that's happened is you lost the body fat and you look like a bodybuilder. You look like someone who's been training their ass off for years to get into shape for competition. So the Anavar thing, absolutely. Dynabar, I think I'd go also, Stephen, because the DHT part, that's DHT that Steve has prescribed earlier. We done a show recently on the idea of what binds the SHBG. And so the idea of any steroid, but specifically in this example, the Yanavar or the Debo, gets to be the DHT derivatives tend to help you free up more of the free testosterone. In other words, you get more bang for your buck from the other steroids, so from the Debo, from the Anavar, by having more of that available for you to do the thing that you want the Debo or the Anavar to do. So that's another reason for doing it, holding on to the muscle tissue and getting more out of the Debo or getting more out of the Anavar. That absolutely appeals to me. And again, we're not talking massive dosages of those, 30 to 50 milligrams of either one of those two. I think I would actually probably go with 30 milligrams if I was using the Debo daily, so 210 milligrams from that, and 600 milligrams of the Primo, or 50 milligrams a day, which pushes my total to still under a gram, which is a great sweet spot for me. There are other things you can do. And I think, again, Steve, It all comes down to what you're looking to do. I think the only reason I would tweak such a cycle from my choices, and this might be the reason what happens with some users, where they'll bring in something at week 4 or they'll bring in something at week 8. That sometimes happens because they're seeing change in their physique and they want to manipulate their variables. And I used to be, I know Steve and I have talked about this on shows, I used to be, this is the plan, we stayed with the plan. But as Steve said, being flexible enables us to see an hour body response, especially the first time you run Primo and or what you're running it with versus the look that you're trying to obtain, especially if you know your diet and your training are on point. Okay, I can bring this variable in. Isn't anymore a case of that was what was available because we can pretty much get anything now. Availability is a lot easier than it used to be. So therefore, it should actually only come down to what I want to look, the look I want to present, how I want to appear on stage, the way that my body is responding. Example, Steve, if I could get ill halfway through a cycle, just something small, nothing crazy, that makes me retain water a little bit. Some sign of inflammation, a small injury, whatever. I might want to change things around, but I know I'm going to recover in time for the competition. So I can tweak the variables then. I can bring a peptide in, that kind of stuff. So there's the idea. It's that flexibility. Come onto the forums, definitely, and ask us these kind of questions because I want to see, people don't always respond in the same way, Steve. You don't have perfect, very few people, even top professional bodybuilders. So almost no cycle ever has been perfect from start to finish. That's why they've had to change things around. Something's come up, a contract's finished. They can't, they've had to change gyms. The wife decides she wants to move home halfway through. I'm stressed like a motherfucker. And this is the reason what's going on. Just stuff like that happens all the time. So that's another reason why people sometimes need to be flexible in their approach to what's going on. Let's talk a little bit about Para Pharma. We touched upon this at the show. We've been back and forth over the history of why there were issues with Primo. And I'll expand on that again, okay? So for me, if I'm going to use a source now, and I have used, as you said, fake drugs back in the day, they had nothing in them, labs that have lasted 9 months, labs that have lasted a year, labs that have been raided by the police, the chemist that's been arrested, I can tell you stories about that, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, what makes a source recommended, approved, rated? How does it build up its reputation? Number one, length of time, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Para Pharma's up around the 20-year mark. You don't get to be in the business this long. What are we talking about? 2004, Steve, till now, and not be a good source. You just don't. You can't, your reputation goes up and down based on the quality material that you're able to produce. That's number one. Number two, we've seen actual manufacturing processes from different labs. The investment in infrastructure is crazy, crazy expensive. Just to set up a production line, just for protein powder, Steve, from the filler at one end into the tubs and the labels at the other end, is £250,000. Some years ago, it's probably more than that now. Same thing kind of applies when you're producing steroids. If you're a proper company that's been around for 20 fucking years, you have to have a proper setup. You want to be able to test the raws when they come in, the raw materials. You want a quality control product as it's coming down the line. You want to take your staff off and get them retrained. You want to be looking to expand and improve on the range of products that you're already producing. And you do it all the time, updating your website and so on and so forth. I want to see, and Para Pharma has this, I want to be able to go onto a brand's site and I want to see how long they've been in the business, the kind of quality standards they're trying to adhere to. International companies have different standards, but there's a kind of recognized standard across the board. So if they're 9,001 or there or thereabouts, or they're producing it so that they look at every single part of the chain from raws to production to distribution, that they're testing products randomly and so on and so forth. And that's in-house. You have companies that have people that come in from outside and take product off the line, or you can take your product off the line. You can literally double check the quality of product, not only with your own lab, but with independent labs to see if the independent lab matches your lab. That way you're keeping your lab on point. So, for example, we know Para Pharma products have been tested, not even by the company themselves, but by members of our forums who've taken samples brought out of their own expense from different approved sources, including Para Pharma, sent these off. Again, just let me expand on that very quickly, Steve, because you said about this earlier. It was expensive as fuck. And you pretty much, if you didn't have a buddy that worked in a chemistry lab that could test products, It was stupid money, like $1,000 to have products tested properly back in the day. Even that price has come down because the machines have become more sophisticated, expensive as fuck to buy, but cheaper per test than they ever used to be back in the day. So you can have products tested for sensible. So we've had members of the forums who've taken, as I said earlier, randomized samples of different products, including Para Pharma branded products, and had them sent off to labs to be tested. And I'll touch on something we've talked about in other shows. That particular person, I think, was 10 products, including Para Pharma, and they fully expected at least 20%, 2 products to fail. No products failed. Every single one was within the deviation allowed that pharmaceutical companies are roughly 5%. So if it's supposed to be 100 milligrams, if it was 95 milligrams, that was an allowable variable. This is in the pharmaceutical industry. As my recollection, Steve, it was 97, 98, and 99%. Pretty much the average right across the board. In other words, every single product passed, and every single product was within the range that was allowable, the deviation that was allowable, included in the pharmaceutical industry itself. So there's that. I've personally used Para Pharma products, the Cut 150. And I've logged with, I'm not even going to tell you now. I want you to come on the forum, find my cut log, and see what I did, how much I was using, how my body responded, and so on and so forth. I can tell you now it was a great success, but I want you to come on and look and see how I got on, see how I felt when I was using the Para Pharma products, see how quick the Para Pharma products got to me for me to use, what I thought, the photographs of the valves, the whole goddamn thing. That's just me personally, and I'm not the only person you can do with that with on the forums. What do you think about that, Steve? What makes for you a great lab, a great source before we
Yeah,
finish?
and as you mentioned a couple times on this podcast, and we mentioned it earlier, the key is that today we can send our stuff out to be tested, and people have done that, and they verified, and Paraforma had no clue, as you said, they had no clue these people would test it out. These are just normal guys
None,
paying for
none.
the gear out of their own pocket,
Yep.
and they sent the products out, and these are labs, they're actual labs, they're not these like stupid test kits that
No,
people
it's the
get.
same labs that
So,
responsible companies like Para Pharma used. You saw the certificate of analysis on the screen, and it was the same labs that the big companies like Para Pharma use. And these were the results for each product with the brand name, the amount it should have had in the bottle, and how much it had in the bottle, and so on and so forth. A couple of products were slightly over. So for me, that was great. This is not Para Pharma. It's not Para Pharma doing independence. It's not Para Pharma's in-house, all of which exist. No, these are products that were sent out to an independent lab by someone paying out of their own pocket, the $100 testing, and they paid for the vial. They brought specific companies that either resell Para Pharma or from Para Pharma direct, sent the product with everything else. Can you please test these 10 products? Here's a certificate analysis on the forums for you guys. And the member themselves admitting they wanted, thought, not wanted, thought at least 2 had failed, and nothing failed. And that included Para Pharma, every single product. And he's paying out of his own goddamn pocket, Steve. I mean, we're looking at probably well over $1,000, 750, £800. And that's just for the testing. That's not even the product. It probably cost him half that for the product, just for the test. He's put 1,200, 1,300, £1,400, so about $1,600 total out of his own goddamn pocket. So he knows what's done, and he could pass that on. People sometimes they get a bit crazy about these things. Steroid labs, this is reputation. Da, 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 da. No, listen, the reason why we do these shows, and the reason why we talk about this, and the reason why we rate Para Pharma is we know in-house testing, in-house quality control. We've seen the certificates of analysis produced by them, and then we've seen the same goddamn thing done by someone who almost wanted products to fail, and nothing failed, Para Pharma included. Was all where it should be. And this is, again, not 1 year, not 2 years, not 5 years, 10, 15, 20 years in the business doing that on a daily basis all over the fucking world, Steve. The domestic market of America, 30, 40, 50 million users. The worldwide market, China, India, Europe, here in the UK, huge markets. And Para Pharma right across the board. Forums outside of our family group of forums that rate Para Pharma. That's so rare, Steve, to see that across. We all have our favourites. We all have the ones that we like. No, Para Pharma is right across the board, approved, rated, considered to be a great source for product all over the fucking world. And that's where the products are going all over as well. We're seeing great success on people's training logs. Listen, guys, let us know what you think on that. What do you think on that, Steve, just as we finish and we go into the disclaimer?
Yeah, you summed it up. So we'll have more podcasts coming from Para Pharma in the future. They are a
Yeah.
solid brand, so give them a shout.
Let us know what you think about Para Pharma products. Have you used their Primobolan? Come onto the forums. Like I said, check out my log, my cut log. Check out Noah's log. Other people put the search in and come up with the Primobolan product. See how people have been using it. What's your experience? Let us know what you think. Am I wrong about the history? We want to hear your comments. Please note we are not doctors, and the opinions are ours. It's our view based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.